Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 10 of hearings in Tranche 1, Phase 2 at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Neil Fernandez, and I am the hearings manager. For those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you're invited to speak by the chairman, as Zoom will pick up on all noises and you will be on screen. I now hand over to the chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Parks is going to spend the next half an hour or so summarising the evidence of two undercover officers who have provided witness statements and reminding us of the evidence of three who haven't, which are contained in documents only. Ms. Parks.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I'll be summarising evidence for HN 353 and HN 351, starting with HN 353. HN 353 joined the SDS in late spring 1974 and served in the unit until June 1978. He infiltrated the International Socialists, the IS, and the International Marxist Group, the IMG, using the cover name Gary Roberts. There is a restriction order in respect of his real name. The reports date between the 18th of June 1974 and the 4th of August 1978, although he claims to have infiltrated the two groups between September 1974 and June 1978, amounting to a total of 195 weeks. HN 353 joined Special Branch in the early 1970s as a detective constable, but he did no undercover work prior to joining the SDS. He describes the existence of the unit as a well-kept secret, although he did not know any details about its operation. He was recruited by an SDS officer with whom he had worked previously and agreed to join because it sounded different and exciting. He was not required to undertake any tests or interviews as part of this process, and there was no formal information or training provided to him about the nature of the work. He understood that his primary role was to gather intelligence about public disorder so that demonstrations could be policed effectively. His initial service in the SDS back office, typing up reports, allowed him to learn from other officers. He was not given specific instructions about what intelligence to obtain, but knew from prior police experience which information about group activities would be of interest. HN 353's cover name, Gary Roberts, was that of a deceased child. He obtained the name and date of birth from Somerset House, but did not use any other details from the child's life. He also took the IMG party name, Gary Shopland, although he does not recall ever using this. He had cover accommodation near Muswell Hill and cover employment as a painter decorator, although he did no work in this role. After joining the South East London branch of the IMG, he enrolled in a bachelor's degree at Thames Polytechnic, studying political economy, funded by the MPS. He became vice president of the student union. He fell behind with his coursework and never sat his finals. HN 353 was provided with a cover vehicle in which he stored tools to support his cover employment. He also used it for group work in the IMG, assisting in the distribution of the Red Star newspaper and transporting Jonathan Silberman on a speaking tour. HN 353 states that he was part of the Finsbury Park IS from approximately September 1974, but he agrees that he was probably the author of an IS report signed in his real name and dated the 18th of June 1974. He recalls attending the demonstration where Kevin Gately lost his life, but notes that his reporting on this is missing. This demonstration took place in June 1974, which, combined with the June report bearing his name, may indicate that HN 353 infiltrated the IS a little earlier than he recalls. He would not have considered himself an official IS member, but states that he reported regularly on the group for at least a year. HN 353 recalls that his involvement with the South East London IMG began in around September 1975, and for about 6 months he attended both groups before the IMG required him to choose between them. He chose the IMG and remained a member of that group until the end of his deployment in around June 1978. He believes that his initial tasking into the Finsbury Park IS would have come from Detective Chief Inspector Neal, who was also responsible for his move to the IMG. HN 353 can't be sure whether he influenced this transfer, but having reviewed the reports provided by the inquiry, he believes that he might have been tasked to the IMG to replace HN 338. HN 353 denies being the author of any of the IMG reports attributed to him prior to September 1975. However, it should be noted that from the 21st of November 1974, there are a number of STS reports which concern IMG members connected to Thames Polytechnic or IMG meetings in South East London, both features of HN 353's reporting. HN 353 suggests that IMG reporting prior to the autumn of 1975 is likely to be that of HN 338, an SDS officer also deployed into the IMG. However, the inquiry believed that HN 338 was withdrawn from the field in December 1973, and so could not be responsible for this reporting. In addition, HN 338 reported on the IMG in the Notting Hill and West London area. The report dated the 31st of December 1974, which HN 353 rejects as being attributable to him by virtue of the date, provides information about an IMG meeting which took place in the Queen's Arms on Burridge Road, SE18, the site of a large number of meetings of the South East branch of the IMG, which HN 353 confirms were attended by him. HN 353 disputes the attribution of various other reports in his pack, whilst also noting that the majority of his IS reporting is missing. For the IMG, he states that the inquiry appears to be missing his reporting between December 1977 and June 1978, including coverage of 2 large anti-racism demonstrations, one in Lewisham and another in Wood Green. The latter involved the IMG scouting for the route to be taken by the National Front March. He states that, quote, "We were scoping for good attack points and sources of ammunition, i.e. rubble." He would also have provided a report after the demonstration took place. HN 353 believes that the public order intelligence was disseminated to police uniform departments and would have been valuable where it was relied upon. In general, HN 353 believes that the available reporting does not really show the kind of intelligence that he produced on the subject of public order, but he does not know why this would be missing. Amongst the reports attributable to HN 353 obtained by the inquiry, there is no reference to any potential or actual violence, and no overt discussion of potential or actual public disorder. During HN 353's IS deployment between September 1974 to March 1976, there was one reference to a demonstration, albeit one organised by the National Abortion Campaign and not by IS. 70 people attended this march, led by 3 women in a Mini with a loudspeaker. During his IMG deployment between September 1975 and June 1978, there are 15 reports which mention demonstrations or pickets. 3 of these refer to joint actions with other groups to protest against public sector cuts, for example, the closure to the Weir Maternity Hospital. 2 deal with planned opposition to the National Front. 2 refer to IMG attendance at an anti-fascist protest, one in Blackburn and another in Hyde, Cheshire, although HN 353 believes this latter report is not his. One additional report refers to planned national anti-racism demonstration, and the remaining reports refer to IMG support for other organisations, such as the National Abortion Campaign and the Labour Party Young Socialists. Although none of the reports mention violence, HN 353 states that he witnessed the usual punch-ups at demonstrations with the IMG, but he was generally at the back. On one occasion, he and other protesters were charged by a police-mounted unit. There was no violence to property that he can recall. It all took place between right and left-wing groups, with the police in between. During his involvement in IS, HN 353 would attend at least one private meeting per week, as well as public meetings and demonstrations at the weekend. He continued this pattern following his transfer to the IMG, but in addition to this schedule, he attended Thames Polytechnic, where he was involved in student politics. This resulted in him being in his cover identity for 8 hours a day. It was rare for him to have time off at home, but this happened more frequently in the autumn and winter months when there were fewer demonstrations. He attended meetings at the STS Safe House 3 times a week, but this fell to twice a week later in his deployment. Managers were also available by telephone or in person outside regular meeting times. He notes that, quote, "I would hand in a manuscript report at our STS meetings, which I'd never see again. I don't recall seeing the typed up version." As for the content of reports, HN 353 writes, quote, "I would hoover up everything. It wasn't my job to analyze it. I would just report it." The majority of the reporting attributed to HN 353 records discussions at IMG meetings, usually on the topics of policies and political structure of the organization. He states that he included the political content of meetings, but this would have been more for the benefit of the security services than for the police. Counter-subversion was not the primary aim of the SDS, but virtually all intelligence was copied to the security services. HN 353 did not have any direct involvement with them, but the security services did award him a commendation for one of his reports, which he assumes was for the IMG National Conference. A telephone message from Box 500 thanks Assistant Chief Superintendent Neal on the 3rd of November 1976 for the report on the IMG conference, stating that it will, quote, "be of tremendous value to my service." HN 353 states that, quote, "I don't think anything I witnessed was actually subversive. The IMG was strong on words, but in hindsight, I think they were not really likely to act on them." His view was that the IMG wanted to establish a communist state with power to the workers, but he states that, quote, "I don't think they knew how to achieve that goal. The theory they followed would have endorsed the use of violence to achieve their aim, but I never saw them actually applying violence to that aim, aside from when they were trying to throw the National Front off the street." HN 353 was not tasked to report on entryism, but he knew that it would be of interest to Special Branch and the security services, although in the IMG this was done in, quote, "a quite half-hearted way." He was not aware of any IMG policy of entryism into trade unions. HN 353 states that he was not tasked to report on racial or sexual equality campaigns, but would record these topics where they were discussed in meetings, such as various anti-racist work planned by the IMG. There is a report dated the 24th of January 1977 concerning the founding delegate conference of the All Lewisham Campaign Against Racialism and Fascism. Workshops at this event, quote, "revealed the considerable amount of antipathy towards the police in Lewisham, who were seen to engage in frequent harassment of Blacks. The question was asked why no official representative of the police was in attendance at the conference." HN 353 states that he was not tasked to report on this meeting, but would have attended in his capacity as Vice President of the Student Union. Reports dated the 8th of May 1975 and the 27th of June 1975 record engagement by the core participant Mary with the National Abortion Campaign, and a report on the 27th of June 1975 contains personal details about her planned holiday. These reports predate the time when HN353 believes he reported on the IMG, but he notes that he does recognize Mary's name, although he cannot be sure why. A further report dated the 26th of September 1975 also mentions Mary. Core participants Richard Chessum and Piers Corbyn are also mentioned in HN353's reporting. He states that Piers Corbyn was not an elected politician during this period, although he might have been a local councillor. HN353 states that he did not hold any position of responsibility in IMG. He recalls being advised by managers not to become an organiser in groups. There was no training on whether close relationships and cover identities were permitted, nor any discussion about participation in criminal activity. However, HN353 reports that he had no personal or sexual relationships and did not take any positions of trust with activists. He did not engage in any criminal activity, save for willfully obstructing the highway selling newspapers or tearing down opposition posters at demonstrations. He did not know any of his colleagues participating in criminal activity, although some involvement in public disorder might have occurred. He would not have known if any of them had engaged in sexual activity whilst deployed. The end of HN353's deployment coincided with the end of his studies, which pleased him as he had been offered another police role. He believes that he withdrew from the group by making up a story that he was too depressed to take his finals. He was unaware of a 12-month limit on the length of deployments, but does not believe that this duration would have allowed sufficient time to enter and exit a group successfully. So that concludes the summary for HN353. I will move on now to HN351. HN351 served in the SDS from spring 1974 to March 1975, reporting on the International Socialists, or the IS. He used the cover name Jeff Slater. Publication of his real name is restricted. He joined Special Branch in the early 1970s as a detective constable, during which time he gained some experience of undercover work. He cannot recall how he was selected for the SDS, but thinks it was likely that SDS managers spoke to him to explain the nature of the work. HN351 did use a deceased child's identity, which he notes was a convention at the time, although he cannot recall being given specific instructions to do so, nor the rationale for this practice. He used the name and date of birth of the deceased child, but no further details from his life. He undertook some work in his cover employment and had a cover vehicle and accommodation, along with some cover documentation. HN351 received no formal training, although he felt that his prior undercover work in Special Branch, combined with his service in the SDS back office, provided some preparation. He was not given specific instructions about the kind of intelligence to seek, although officers could request guidance at the weekly SDS meetings. He states that, quote, "You picked up all sorts of information without knowing whether it would be of use, but passed it back anyway. That said, we had a general understanding of which areas Special Branch was interested in and would not stray beyond that." He knew not to act as an agent provocateur from CID training school. He states that no tradecraft manual existed to his knowledge. HN351 started his deployment in the SDS back office, and by the end of May 1974 was described as being ready to go into the field. However, the first report attributed to this officer dates from several months later than that, the 8th of August 1974. The final report attributed to him dates from the 24th of March 1975. The maximum length of his deployment would have amounted to 43 weeks. The majority of the reports attributed to him concern the Tottenham branch of IS. HN 351 has not been able to confirm the attribution of these reports, stating that he would not have written any of them himself, as he provided intelligence orally or via irregular notes. These were typed up by administrative staff and disseminated by his superiors. He never saw the finished product, and he has been unable to comment on whether any of his reporting is missing. He states that the intelligence he provided may have been used to form composite reports, as other officers were also reporting on IS. He was not tasked to infiltrate a particular group at the outset of his deployment, but he went to protests and demonstrations where he made contact with activists. He believes that this information would have been relayed to managers at the weekly SDS meetings, where he would have been instructed to focus on IS. His only formal group membership was of IS. This group was of interest because they were a subversive group, quote, organizing to bring about the fall of the state, and they would use any means available to achieve this, including violence. He states that part of the reason he was deployed was to gain information about the number of police needed to manage protests. HN 351 goes on to say that he, quote, witnessed plenty of serious public disorder and violence while serving as an undercover officer. And although he cannot recall the specific incidents, it would have been, quote, during demonstrations that got out of hand, where he saw severe beatings of policemen by activists, and activists beating up members of the public who intervened. He also witnessed violence between counter-protest groups and saw activists cause damage to property. He was never involved in any disorder, violence, or other criminal activity. The only potential violence discussed in the reports attributed to HN 351 occurs following a socialist worker meeting on the 1st of August 1974. IS members planned to attend a National Front demonstration in Leicester that month and were considering taking pepper, marbles, and flour with them. Some reports contain employment details about IS members, and others discuss links between IS and trade unions. For example, a report on the 20th of March 1975 identifies a Tottenham member as being part of the National Union of Journalists. In his witness statement, HN 351 explains that, quote, Special Branch would have been interested in employment that was taken up by IS members because they may have created problems within their workplaces by arranging strikes and the like. A report dated the 22nd of November 1974 states that a Finsbury Park IS member at a North London aggregate meeting stressed the need for more intervention by IS members in industrial disputes at local factories. In reference to this report, HN 351 notes that, quote, it is possible that I was asked to report on the influence of IS in industrial settings and trade unions, but I do not remember this. He goes on to say that, quote, I was not tasked to report on trade unions while in the SDS, and would only have mentioned them if I was concerned that a member of IS would seek to disrupt their legitimate activities and use the trade union to further IS's subversive aims. He denies joining a union or becoming involved in any union affairs. Some reports mention racial or sexual equality campaigning. For example, a report on the 5th of December 1974 contains discussion about the necessity of appointing a women's industrial organizer, while a report 2 weeks later notes that members were urged to attend a picket outside a Mile End pub, where the landlord was exercising, quote, a pernicious form of the colour bar. HN 351 states that he was not tasked to report on equality campaigning and cannot say why this information would have been included. Other reports concern a variety of topics: IS talks on global political issues, discussion of the Irish Troubles, plans to attend protests and educational classes, and details of individual branch members. 2 reports from January 1975 contain copies of the North London District IS babysitting rota. A report dated the 25th of February 1975 provides a list of people who attended a birthday party at a private address, most but not all of whom were IS members. HN 351 notes that although he was not specifically tasked to attend social events, sometimes it was necessary in order to maintain cover. A report dated the 6th of January 1975 identifies Jeff Slater as the new socialist worker organizer, but HN 351 has no recollection of whether or not he undertook this role. He states that he did not take on any positions of trust or form particularly close relationships whilst undercover, which he attributes to the brevity of his deployment. He did not engage in any sexual relationships, and none were ever discussed in his presence. HN 351's deployment ended at his request because he found it, quote, too debilitating and exhausting, both mentally and physically. However, he does not consider his difficulties to have been a reflection of the level of support available, and believes that the informal welfare monitoring was adequate for the era. HN 351's SDS work did have long-term effects on his emotional well-being and mental health. He could not seek help with this due to the secrecy around his work, and there were no welfare services available to him within the MPS at the time. So that concludes the summary for HN 351. In addition to the witness statements and documents for these officers, the inquiry is also publishing today documents in relation to HN 297, HN 300, and HN 13. HN 297 had the cover name Rick Gibson and reported on the Southeast London branch of the Troops Out movement and on Big Flame. Analysis of his documents can be found at pages 153 to 171 of counsel to the inquiry's written opening statement for Tranche 1, Phase 2. HN 300's cover name was Jim Pickford. He reported on various left-wing groups in the Battersea and Wandsworth area, as well as on the Anarchist Workers Association. Analysis of his documents is at pages 175 to 180 of the written opening statement. And finally, HN 13 used the cover name Barry Loader and reported on the Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninist. Documents relating to his deployment are considered at pages 180 to 184 of the written opening statement. So that concludes the summary's introduction.
Thank you very much. We will now break for 10 minutes to enable arrangements to be set up for the resumption of live evidence.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is now 10:30 a.m., so we shall reconvene at 10:40 a.m. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. As at the beginning of every live evidential session, a recording made earlier is going to be played. If you're listening to it for the first time, please listen carefully. I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I have made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I am satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it had been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on the person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it silently for any other purpose. In particular, you may transmit your account of what you have seen and heard in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event which you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequence will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I am sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them, and with my help if necessary, they will provide you with the answer. Before we begin today's evidential hearing, I would like to thank those of you who are tweeting messages outside the hearing room about what is going on and is transmitted to it, for abiding in a general way with the instruction that you've just heard played. But I was told that a number did, one reason or another, get their estimate of 10 minutes wrong and tweeted in one or two instances significantly before the 10-minute period had elapsed. 10 minutes has been chosen for a purpose. It permits me and the inquiry team to stop breaches of orders that I have made from being disclosed outside the hearing room. It's a necessary control, and I would ask, please, everybody who is transmitting to take care to allow the 10 minutes to elapse. Absolutely, the last thing I want to do is to have to take steps to enforce that 10-minute period. Thank you. Mr. Chessum, can you hear me? It may be that you're on mute. If,
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry.
but no, going on to mute is a mistake that I used to make repeatedly. All of us make it first time round. Don't worry about it. Do you wish to swear or to affirm?
Affirm.
Yes, then the words of affirmation will be read to you in a moment.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chessum. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
I understand that you would like to affirm.
Yes.
Thank you. Please repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Chessum. Chairman.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chessum, please could you confirm your full name?
It's Richard Thomas Chessum.
And are the contents of your witness statement dated the 4th of April 2020 true and correct to the best of
Yes.
your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
That puts the whole of your witness statement into evidence, and so I will only dwell on certain parts of it now. Can I start, please, with an overview of your political activism? You tell us that the overarching aim of your political activity over a lifetime has been to contribute to a better world. Is that right?
That's right.
And that you began your journey as a Methodist Christian socialist, where you developed your beliefs in social justice, human rights, and socialism.
Yes.
You then moved into the Labour Party and worked for the campaign for nuclear disarmament whilst you were living in Bedfordshire in the 1960s.
Yes.
And then from about 1968 onwards, you became much more interested in international issues.
Yes, and I moved to London in 1968.
And there you became involved with the Vietnam Solidarity Committee, and you attended all 3 of the major VSC demonstrations in October 1967, March 1968, and October 1968.
Yes.
You then became involved in the anti-apartheid movement and the Stop the 70 tour. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
And you tell us in your witness statement that there was an occasion where you joined a pitch invasion at the Oval cricket ground and spread pebbles on the outfield. Is that right?
Well, not on the outfield, on the actual pitch itself. About 20 of us ran onto the pitch, and our aim was to bring the game to a halt in order that we could engage in discussion with the actual players, the South African players. And we did that. And after the demonstration had finished, we left.
Can you help me whether that was part of the campaign against the Wilf Isaacs tour or whether it was part of the campaign against the forthcoming tour of the South African cricket team?
Yeah, it was the W. Isaacs 11, which, like the full South African team, was entirely white. And it was a prelude to the tour of the official South African international side the following year.
And as a member of which group were you participating in that direct action?
It was the Stop the 70 tour, really.
You also tell us in your witness statement that you were at one of the rugby matches at Twickenham. Can you help us with whether that was the December 1969 Test match or whether it was a January 1970 match between South Africa and the Barbarians?
I can't really. Rugby was not a sport that I followed. And I remember going on one occasion to a rugby match where there was a protest, but I can't remember which one.
Can you recall the nature of the protests that took place at that match?
Well, it varied. I mean, people running onto the pitch, onto the field. And actually some smoke bombs were thrown, but I was not involved in that.
Thank you. You then enrolled at Goldsmith College in 1970 and set up the Socialist Society there.
Yes, there was no Socialist Society in Goldsmiths when I enrolled. I'd been to the LSE where my sister had been a student, and in that university there was a Conservative Society, a Liberal Society, no Labour Society, but there was a Socialist Society, because in those days I think there was general disillusionment with the Labour government of 64-70, and most independent socialists were outside the Labour Party. So I had in mind when I went to Goldsmiths College, setting up a socialist society similar to the one that was in the LSE.
And that, you tell us, was a democratic organisation. It was open to all students and staff, and you generally held open meetings weekly.
Yes, I set up a stall myself because no one else was there to do it. And I recruited about 70 people to the Socialist Society on that first day. It was a time when there was a great deal of political awareness. And in fact, my future wife was one of the people that I recruited on that day.
And you also joined the Anti-Internment League and organised a demonstration following the killings on Bloody Sunday on the 30th of January 1972.
Yes, I saw it as a continuation of the activity that I'd already been involved in. I shared a flat with several people, one of whom was Irish, and she was very indignant that we were organising against American troops in Vietnam, but not doing anything about our own British troops in Northern Ireland. She persuaded me that I should do something. I met some people from People's Democracy on a demonstration in Trafalgar Square who were distributing leaflets. I got talking to them. I ended up helping them distribute the leaflets because I felt their cause was just. So yes, I saw my involvement in Irish politics as very much a continuation of the anti-racist politics that I'd been involved in.
And what were your concerns about internment?
It was a power which had been given to the Northern Ireland government under the Special Powers Act. It was an extreme form of legislation, very repressive. And in fact, one of the leaders of apartheid in South Africa had said he would willingly swap all of his anti-terrorist powers for one special clause of the Special Powers Act. So it was introduced, internment was introduced in every decade of the Northern Ireland state, and it was introduced again in the 1970s as a response to the troubles that were occurring. It was inflammatory, really, because it was one of the things that the people in the North on the nationalist side had always felt was one of the most repressive things that they endured. And to introduce internment was like a red rag to a bull. And I do think it led to a recruitment to the IRA.
Did that concern you?
Yes. It was not the direction I felt that the British government should allow the Northern Irish government to go in.
Then you tell us that in 1972, you joined the International Marxist Group.
Yes, I did. In some ways, I was reluctant to join any of the left groups. because I'd been involved in the Labour Party in the 1960s, which is a very broad-based coalition. When I set up the Socialist Society, I envisaged a very broad-based society, which would include socialists of all different varieties. So it was against the grain for me to join a small left-wing group. But in those days, most people on the left were joining these groups. And in the end, if you didn't join one or other of these groups, you tended to get a bit isolated. And I was persuaded by some people in the IMG who I'd known through the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign that I should join them because I agreed with them more than others. And on that basis, I did join. I was uncertain about whether to join, but I did. In the end, I only lasted for a year in the organization because, again, I reacted against being in a little political goldfish bowl. I preferred to be on the open sea.
I see. And so just to be clear, we're going to come to Rick Gibson in a moment. Were you a member of the IMG at any time that you knew Rick Gibson?
No, I was in the IMG, I think from 72 to 73. Rick Gibson appeared on the scene after the Birmingham pub bombings where they were in November 1974. And I think he appeared just after then.
You tell us that the Troops Out movement, commonly known by the acronym TOM, formed, as best you can recall, in 1973, but you didn't join the organization immediately.
No, I had been ill. In fact, I had a period of illness at the time, and I left my course for a year because of that, and had gone back to it, and therefore I was studying for the final year of my degree a bit late. So I wanted to concentrate on that, and I didn't want to get ill again. So I had really decided to bow out of active politics a little bit, and it wasn't until Gibson arrived on the scene that I got involved again.
We're going to come back to Tom in a lot more detail in due course, but it may help to set the scene at this stage to ask a few questions about it as an organisation. Is it right that it had essentially two aims? The first was to seek the withdrawal of British troops from Northern Ireland, and the second was self-determination for the Irish people.
Yes.
And it had a tier of national organisation, a tier of London organisation, and then branches all around the country.
Yes.
And that the branches sent delegates, the London branches sent delegates to the London meetings, and all branches sent delegates to national events. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And that the group held an annual national conference.
Yes.
It promoted educational activities.
Yes, raising awareness.
And deputations to Northern Ireland and reports and that sort of thing.
That's right. I never myself went on any of the deputations to Northern Ireland, but it did do that.
And also organised demonstrations.
Yeah. Occasionally.
Moving on now to a little bit later in your political life, you became very active in the Labour Committee on Ireland. Is that right?
Yes, and I was very much at home in the Labour Committee in Ireland. It was a much more broad-based organisation that I felt much more at home in than other organisations I belonged to previously.
And you tell us that you acted as the press officer for the Labour Committee on Ireland from approximately the mid-1980s into the early 1990s.
Yes, I had been parliamentary Labour candidate in the 1983 election, and I'd received quite a lot of publicity through press releases that I'd put out. And this came to the notice of some people in the Labour Committee in Ireland, and they invited me to become their press officer.
And at what stage in your political career did you rejoin the Labour Party?
I had rejoined the Labour Party in 1976. I'd been a member from 1963 to 1968 in Bedfordshire. When I moved to London, I never really made a conscious decision to resign from the party, but I lapsed. Perhaps if I'd have stayed in Bedfordshire, I would have stayed a member, but because I moved to London and got involved in lots of other activities, and there was general disillusionment with the performance of the Labour government of the 60s, it didn't seem priority to rejoin at that time. When we moved from London to the Midlands, when I took up a grant to do a PhD, I had decided that once we moved, I would rejoin. And I was also inspired to rejoin by what I saw as a growing left-wing movement inside the Labour Party associated with Tony Benn.
Would it be right to understand that you rejoined the Labour Party after you had last seen Rick Gibson?
That's right, yes.
Returning now to more recent years, you tell us that the latest chapter of your political activism has been with a group called Assist Sheffield for the last 17 years, which assists asylum seekers and refugees.
Yes, a friend of mine and I and one or two other people, we organised a conversation club for refugees and asylum seekers, where they could come, break out of their isolation and learn to speak English better by mixing with English-speaking people. And it came to our notice in that conversation club that many of them were completely destitute. And we then investigated why, and we learned much more about the asylum system and why this was happening. And we decided that really we needed to set up another organisation that would raise money for them, to pay them a small amount of money each week, and eventually to provide them with accommodation. And that was the basis on which we set up Assist. I think we were conscious of the fact that we were fighting not only destitution, but also racism in our society as well, because all of the refugees and asylum seekers we knew were people of colour, and we felt that there was a lot of prejudice against them. So we set it up not knowing how long it would last, because we had no idea whether we could sustain it. But in fact, it's grown to quite a substantial registered charity now. It has 8 houses where we house asylum seekers. It has 300 volunteers, and it's become a substantial presence in the city of Sheffield.
Thank you, Mr. Chessum. With all of that background in mind, I'm now going to take you, if I may, to the last days of 1974. At that time, you were still a student at Goldsmiths College, weren't you?
Yes.
Is it right that you were a member of the Students' Council?
Yes, I was elected to the Students' Council. I had been the left candidate for president of the Students' Union, but Goldsmiths was not a particularly left-wing place on the whole, but I did get elected to the Students' Council.
You were a member of the AIL, but you were not a member of TOM.
I had been a member of the Anti-Internment League earlier. I'm not sure the Anti-Internment League still existed by then.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yes, it was the Troops Out movement that had been set up as the main Irish campaigning organisation.
You had been involved with the AIL.
Yes.
You weren't actually a member of TOM, but did there come a point in time when you were contacted by TOM about a man who called himself Rick Gibson? Yes,
there were some of us in Goldsmiths College who felt that we ought to be doing more on Ireland. After the Birmingham pub bombings, which were a terrible atrocity, some Irish people were reported as being attacked in the street, and we felt that things were escalating out of control of the British government, really, and getting worse. And we felt that we ought to be doing more on Ireland, but what we were provoked into doing it when someone called Rick Gibson had written to the National Office of the Troops Out movement, and the National Office of the Troops Out movement contacted me and said, we have this person who's interested in joining the Troops Out movement. He's asking if there is a branch in South East London. He's signed on as a student at Goldsmiths College, and so, you know, could you do anything about setting up something that would enable him to be active? And we met together and decided to do that.
Can I show you a document, please? This is the document at tab 1 of the hard copy bundle. It's UCPI 5012122. This is an intelligence report from the SDS dated the 11th of February 1975. The subject is Goldsmiths College, and it reads, the following information has been received from a reliable source. On Thursday, the 30th of January 1974, a meeting was held by the Socialist Society of Goldsmiths College, Lewisham Way, SE14, on the subject, Why a Troops Out Movement. The meeting lasted from 7 p.m. until 9:30 p.m. and was attended by 45 persons. First of all, is there an error in the date there? Should that be 30th of January 1975?
Yes, it should.
Can we go now, please, to paragraphs 5 and 6? We see at paragraph 5 that an ex-paratrooper called McConnell was the main speaker. And then at paragraph 6, it says the most important item to be discussed was proposed by Richard Chessum. I think it should say Chessum, not Chesham, shouldn't it?
Yes, yes, it should.
Who suggested...
A frequent misspelling of my name, actually.
It is indeed.
Yes.
Who suggested that a Southeast London branch of TOM be formed with representatives coming from all the groups present. This was met initially with little enthusiasm, but it was eventually decided that an informal meeting would take place in 1 week. Can't quite read, in 1 week's time, with at least one with at least one representative, forgive me, of each group being present. 2 questions. First of all, was Rick Gibson at that meeting?
I think it's likely that he would have been. We had met Rick Gibson in the Students' Union bar.
Yes,
initially, and he was certainly involved with us before we organised any public meetings.
Yes, because that was going to be my second question. Had you met Rick Gibson before the 30th of January 1975?
Yes, I'm sure we had. I've been trying to remember when we first met Rick Gibson in the Student Union bar, because I think looking back, we did meet with him probably in December, but of course it was a bit late then with term coming to an end to organise anything public, which is why we delayed doing that until after the term resumed in the spring, and that's why the meeting was in January, the public meeting.
Thank you. We can take that document down now, please. You mentioned earlier the fact that the Birmingham pub bombings occurred on the 21st of November 1974, and you suggest in your witness statement a connection between that event and the appearance not much later of Rick Gibson on your scene. Do you have any basis for that other than the very obvious temporal connection?
It was in retrospect that I think we regarded it as significant. Once we knew that Rick had been an undercover police officer. At the time, it seemed like a coincidence.
Thank you. There is then a small meeting that takes place on the 6th of February, and perhaps we can look at the report of that. It's at tab 2 of the hard copy bundle. The reference is MPS-0728-678. And if we could go to page 2, please. This report is dated the 17th of February 1975, a date which I'm going to just ask you to hold in mind, please. The subject is South East London Tom, although in fact the branch didn't exist at this stage, did it? Hadn't actually been set up.
That's right, yes, yes, we were in the process of organising that.
And it says, paragraph 2, on Thursday, the 6th of February, 1975, in the Students' Union Bar at Goldsmiths College, Lewisham Way, SE14, an informal meeting was held to discuss the possibility of forming a South East London Troops Out movement. Lasted from 8:30 p.m. until 10 p.m. and was attended by 5 persons.
Yes.
It had been suggested by Richard Chessum, an ex-member of the IMG, at a Tom meeting held the previous week. And then there is discussion about that. If I pick it up at the bottom of paragraph 3, it says, he had hoped for a representative from each of the extreme left-wing organisations to attend, but in the event, only he and one other person were present at the start, to be joined later by 3 persons from Lewisham IMG who only attended because their own educational class had been cancelled. Now, we don't normally name activists who are not already in the public domain or participating in the inquiry, so please bear that in mind when answering. But who was the other person present with you at the start of the meeting?
I don't really remember.
I see.
I mean, we met quite a bit in the Students' Union Bar. It was a regular meeting place for informal meetings. And I know we had a number of different meetings in the Students' Union Bar at that time, and different people attended on different occasions.
If we could scroll down to the bottom of the page, please. Paragraph 5 records the persons present as being yourself, 2 people whose names are redacted for privacy reasons, and the person who we are knowing by the pseudonym Mary, with whom Rick Gibson, we are told, went on to have a sexual relationship. Is it your recollection that this was a very small meeting?
This was a meeting. Where was this? In the Students' Union Bar?
Yes.
Yes. Well, they were all small meetings in the Students' Union Bar. They were people who were most committed, who we felt would be most likely to help in setting up a branch.
And we see that the report bears the name of R. Clark, which is Rick Gibson's real name. Is it fair to say then that Rick Gibson had been introduced to Mary from the very earliest stages of his deployment?
I'm never quite sure when he met Mary for the first time. I know that Mary's account, when I saw her again recently after 50 years, she said that she first met him when she was on a socialist stall, a socialist society stall, and she said that was the first time she met him. So it wasn't like we introduced her to him; it was she met him independently of some of us.
I see. Thank you. Could we take that document down now, please? I asked you to bear in mind the date of that report, the 17th of February, because it's one of 4 reports which bear that date. I'm going to display each of the other 3 in turn. First of all, could we have the document which is at tab 3, UCPI 5012136. This is a report about Mary, dated the 17th of February. And we see that it says at paragraph 2, Mary, although not a member of IMG, is actively involved with the group in the Lewisham and New Cross areas and attends education classes run by the organisation. Paragraph 3, she was born in South Africa on privacy and lived in that country until she was 21. She is now a third-year teacher training student at Goldsmiths College, SE14. She lives at, and we've redacted the address for privacy. There then follows a physical description, and at paragraph 6, it says Mary cannot be identified in special branch records. So it would appear from that Rick Gibson had compiled a report about Mary who previously had not been identified by special branch. Can I take it that you were completely unaware that this was going on at the time?
I was completely unaware of it, yes. In fact, I think I only found out after the event that Mary was associating herself with the IMG, because of course she did that long after I'd ceased to be a member. And in fact, I had ceased active involvement in Goldsmiths College as a student. At the time, Mary became very much more involved. It was after I'd ceased to be involved in politics in Goldsmiths College that Mary herself stood as the left candidate for the president of the Students' Union.
Thank you. Could we take that down now? And could we have up the document at tab 4, which is MPS-0728. 205. And this is a report of the same date about you. It says at paragraph 2, Richard Chessum, former IMG member, is currently engaged in trying to form a South East London branch of TOM. He lives at 234 Burridge Road, SE18, and works at Lewisham Public Library. Although he intends leaving at the end of March to study full-time for his sociology finals in the summer. Apparently, he was a full-time student at Goldsmiths College until last year, but did not finish his course because of ill health. Then goes on to say, identify who you were understood to be cohabiting with, and to provide a physical description of you. Before we scroll down, can I ask you, where it says that you were trying to form a South East London branch of TOM, are we to understand from what you've told us already that that was at the instigation of, or as a result of Rick Gibson coming forward and expressing an interest?
Yes, when we got the communication from the National TOM, I think we just felt, well, if other people who have not been involved before are expressing interest, you know, we ought really to do something.
And if we could scroll down now. It says Chessum first came to the notice of special branch on the 24th of January 1969, when he contributed an article to Black Dwarf entitled Decent British Housewives. On the 14th of May 1970, his name and address were taken by police following a fly posting incident at the Oval by members of the South East London STST. On the 4th of February 1972, he intervened in a scuffle when two men were being arrested for taking and driving away, as a result of which one escaped. He then described himself as a member of the National Council for Civil Liberties. After a redaction, it says he last came to notice on the 16th of November 1973, when it was stated he was living at 234 Burridge Road and that his sister, and then the name redacted, had moved to York. First of all, what is your reaction to reading how much information had been recorded about your previous political activities?
Well, as far as the article in Black Dwarf is concerned, I was worried when I saw that I'd come to their notice because of that. I was really worried about what did I say? Will I be embarrassed by what I said in that article? But when the article was dug out by my legal team and I saw it again, I was quite surprised. I thought it was a well-written article. It was a satire on the kind of society we were living in. It even satirized the demonstrators at the Vietnam demonstration. I think it was printed as a letter with my Bedfordshire address at the bottom. And I suspect that was because it didn't conform to all the political stances that the people in Black Dwarf would have liked. So they didn't print it as an article, they printed it as a letter. But my reaction was that if I came to the notice of the special branch because of that, it's very worrying, because there was nothing in that which should have caused them to be concerned. And I just felt that it was a mindset on their part that was really quite sinister and dangerous. And that was my reaction to that. I don't recall a fly posting incident at the Oval. It was when we ran on the pitch, I assume. And with the so-called scuffle, I had been involved setting up an anti-racist organisation in Southeast London as a consequence of Asian people being attacked in the street, and they were hospitalised, some of them quite badly. And because I'd been involved in a lot of these things where there'd been lots of racial attacks, but when I saw two white people apparently attacking two African Caribbeans in a side street near King's Cross, tended to assume it was a racial attack. And the man who was with me, we were walking to a political meeting. I didn't know who the other man was, but we assumed it was a racial attack. He got involved and told me to get involved as well. I think I'd have been rather more cautious if he hadn't been with me. But we did try and intervene, and then it turned out that the white men who we thought were attacking the African Caribbeans were in fact plainclothes police officers, and they were arresting them for attempting to drive and take away a stolen motor vehicle. So I'm mistaken about the reasons for their actions, but I was very, very concerned when we got to the police station just how racist the atmosphere in the police station was. The police constable who had arrested me, he took us up to the desk and told the sergeant the coon, you've referred to him as the coon, was trying to steal a motor vehicle, and this character was helping him. And the sergeant at the desk, who I expected to react against that kind of racist language, he said, he pointed at me and he said, take him to the interview room. And then he said, take the coon down to the cell. And there was this constant racist atmosphere and language the whole time I was there. It was uncorrected by any senior officer, including the inspector who took part in my interrogation, my interview. So although we were mistaken, I think, in thinking that the motivation of the police was, we didn't know were policemen when we saw them. We were mistaken in thinking that their actions were motivated by racism, but they certainly displayed a lot of racism when we got to the police station.
You've explained very fully this incident in your witness statement, and it led ultimately to you being prosecuted. Can I ask you, did there come a time when you told Rick Gibson about those events?
I think I may well have told him, yes. I had so many conversations with Rick Gibson. After meetings of the South East London branch, when there was a lot of sectarianism, often he and I would stay behind for an hour or two afterwards and chat to each other about what had happened at the meeting. And we became quite friendly, and I would have told him lots of things. Yes, I think it highly likely that I told him about that.
Can you remember whether it would have been before or after the 17th of February 1975?
No, I can't remember that.
If we could have up now, please, document at tab 5, which is MPS-1 0728938, and we'll need page 2, please. And this is the final of the series of 4 reports dated the 17th of February, compiled by Detective Constable Clark. And it reads, the following information has been received from a reliable source. Privacy is a member of Lewisham IMG. At present, she is employed as a student nurse at Privacy Hospital Privacy. It is understood that she cohabits with Richard Chessum. There's then a physical description, and at paragraph 4, it says Privacy has recently come to notice in connection with Lewisham IMG. Chessum is the subject of, and then it gives a file reference. This report is a report on your then partner who became your wife the following year. Is that right?
Yes, we lived together for 3 years before we were married and for 20 years afterwards.
That can be taken down now. This may seem like a very obvious question, but had you realised on the 17th of February 1975 who Rick Gibson really was and what he was reporting about you, would you have had anything to do with him in the setting up of the South East London branch of Tom?
Well, obviously not. If we'd have realised he wasn't who he said he was, we would not have had anything to do with him.
Let's look now at what Rick Gibson did do in the setting up of South East London Tom. You tell us in your witness statement that he was involved in some of the preparatory activities, including, for example, distributing leaflets. Is that right?
Yes.
And we know that there was a meeting to discuss the possibility of launching the branch. Perhaps we can call that up. It's at tab 9. And the reference is MPS-0728-701. If we could go to the second page, please. We're now at the 24th of March, 1975, being the date of the report. And paragraph 2 reads, on Wednesday, the 12th of March, 1975, a meeting was held at Goldsmith College, Lewisham Way, SE14, to discuss the possibility of forming a South East London branch of the Troops Out movement. All left-wing groups and trades unions had been invited to send representatives the meeting. And then if we could go to paragraph 4, please. Picking up at the end of that paragraph, it says it was agreed that the group should meet at 8:15 p.m. on Tuesday, the 18th of March at Goldsmith College, and that Richard Chessum would contact members of the Tom executive. So do we see here the preparations for launching the new branch of Tom being taken forward by casting the net wide amongst local left-wing groups and trade unions?
Yes, I think we were disappointed at the time that we found it so difficult to get them involved.
And had Rick Gibson been involved in the preparations for this meeting?
Yes.
And if we go over the page, please. You see that amongst those recorded as being in attendance is Mary. One gets the impression, looking at the papers, that you are quite a small group of activists working together. Yourself, your partner, Mary, the man who called himself Rick Gibson, and perhaps a very small number of others. Is that a fair picture for us to have in mind?
It is, yes. As I say, we were hoping that some of the left-wing groups around would get more involved, and in fact they did. I think it's fairly typical of some of the left-wing groups around that they only jump on bandwagons when they're already worth jumping on, from their point of view.
Thank you. Can we go now to what appears to us to be a document which records the inaugural meeting of the South East London branch of TOM? It's at tab 10, and the reference is MPS-0728-710. And if we could go to page 2, please. Thank you very much. It says, paragraph 2, Tuesday, the 18th of March, 1975, a meeting of the newly formed South East London branch of the Troops Out movement was held at Goldsmiths College, Lewisham Way, SE14. The meeting began at 8:30 p.m. and ended at 10:30 p.m. 11 persons attended, and Richard Chessum was the chairperson. Paragraph 3. The first item on the agenda was the election of officers. The only nominations were Rick Gibson as secretary and Privacy as treasurer, both of whom were elected. It was decided to postpone the election of a student organizer until a member from Goldsmiths attended. It was then agreed that Rick Gibson and Richard Chessum would attend the liaison committee conference to be held on Saturday, the 22nd of March at 1 Addison Gardens, W14, commencing at 2 p.m. as delegates, and Privacy as an observer. So just to stop there, am I right that this is the inaugural meeting of South East London, Tom?
Yes, I think that could be described as such.
And do you recall chairing it?
I don't recall it, but I'm not surprised that I did.
I see. And we see Rick Gibson being appointed secretary. Is that correct?
Yes, well, some of us who were involved were coming up to our finals, and we didn't want to get too committed. And being secretary is the most, it involves the most activity of all, being secretary. And Rick, I remember him saying that he was quite prepared to do it. He volunteered to do it. And he also said that he had a car and he could drive me around to meet up with the people who had been involved in the anti-internment league before, see if they were willing to be active again.
Did he take an interest in those people?
Yes, I mean, many of them were Irish, of a Republican persuasion, and we went and knocked on their doors and asked and told them we were setting up another organisation. Would they like to be active again? And almost uniformly, the response was that they were worried about being active again because the Prevention of Terrorism Act had been introduced, and lots of Irish people were being rounded up and arrested who had not been involved in terrorism, but they were worried that this was happening in the Irish community, and they wanted to lie low for a time because they were afraid of being arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So they said for this reason they wouldn't get involved. But of course what they didn't realise was that they were telling this to a police officer.
And what information, other than the contacts with the former AIL activists, did being secretary of the South East London branch of TOM give Rick Gibson?
Well, if anybody contacted us and wanted to join, he would be the person that would receive the contact and follow it up, or get someone else to follow it up.
And would he have access to the membership details of all the members?
Of the local branch, yes. At that stage, I mean, eventually he was get access to the national membership, but at that stage it would be just the local members of the local branch.
we see that one of the first things that happens recorded at the bottom of the paragraph I read out, that he's nominated together with you as a delegate to go to the liaison committee conference. I get the impression, looking at the documents, that being an active member of a branch gives him access to higher tiers of the TOM organization as a delegate to various meetings. Is that fair?
Yes.
And it seems to be something that happened straight away.
Yes, I think looking back, and we didn't know at the time that he was an undercover officer, but he must have been surprised at the good fortune that he had in being able to get himself into these kind of places so quickly. It was fortuitous from his point of view that we were coming up to our finals, and therefore we were happy for him to be the secretary. And he had quite a bit of luck, I think, in other respects at a later stage of the organisation, of his rise through.
I'm going to be asking about the various activities of the South East London branch of TOM in a moment, but just to, whilst we've got this document up, to look at what was being proposed at this very early stage, could we scroll down so we can see the whole of paragraph 4 and 5, please? Paragraph 4 says a discussion then took place on which left-wing groups and trade unions should now be informed of the existence of a TOM branch in South East London, and whether these groups could affiliate. It was finally decided that individuals who were members of other groups could join TOM if they wished, and that their group would be allowed to send one delegate to each meeting. It was left to Gibson and Privacy to compile a mailing list for those groups not represented. So in short, it would appear the group was seeking affiliates and Gibson was at the heart of the efforts to contact them. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, yes.
Richard Chessum proposed that a delegation from the branch meet local MPs to establish their position on Ireland. It transpired that one such MP, Roland Moyle, was an Under Secretary of State at the Northern Ireland office, and Privacy from Workers' Fight suggested a picket of his surgery. Privacy, an observer from the South London TOM, suggested that this item was rather delicate and advice should be sought from the LCC. This was agreed and the subject was placed on the agenda for the next meeting. So do we see there that reaching out to members of Parliament to presumably to lobby them was also on the agenda?
Very much so.
And do we also begin to see the beginnings of different points of view within the South East London branch of TOM, with a member of Workers' Fight expressing a view which wasn't immediately assented to by others?
Yes, I mean, there were many discussions and disagreements about tactics and strategy. This is normal, I think, in most organisations.
I'd like to ask some general questions now about what the South East London branch of TOM went on to do and how it operated. Is it right to say that from time to time, Rick Gibson would chair branch meetings?
Yes.
And that the early branch meetings took place very often at your home, but later on, it became normal for them to meet at Charlton House?
Yes, I think once we got Charlton House as a venue, most meetings were held there. But there were some meetings at my flat, yes.
And that Rick Gibson would have been involved in organising events and producing leaflets?
Yes.
And that one of the activities of the group was to organise pickets. So, for example, there was a picket of the home of a member of Parliament, Roland Moyle, on Blackheath. Is that right?
That's right. And looking back, it's of great interest now because we picketed outside his house, and Rick was very much involved in the organisation of that, along with the rest of us. And when we had the picket outside the house, some people came out of the house and invited us in for tea and biscuits. And we went in. Roland Moyle himself was not there, but they described themselves as colleagues of his. And they asked us lots of questions about what our views were on the north of Ireland. And I remember them going around one by one and asking us all, if you were in Northern Ireland, which organisation would you support? At the time, we were quite naive, I suppose. We answered all these questions. But looking back, I think it's highly likely that those people were part of the state that was interested in our activities. And knowing, as we now know, that Rick was an undercover police officer, he may have tipped them off to be there so that this could all take place. I know it's speculation, but it seems quite plausible that this was all well organized by people that we had no idea were the secret state.
I'd like to show you a report about a picket outside Roland Moyle's home. It's at tab 36 of the hard copy bundle. The reference is MPS-0728-723. Thank you. It's dated the 22nd of July, 1975, and paragraph 2 reads, as a finale to its week of action, the South East London branch of the Troops Out movement held an open-air rally on Sunday, the 20th of July, opposite the home of Roland Moyle MP, Under Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And there are 2 privacy redactions. A maximum at any one time of 20 persons participated, the majority of whom stayed for only a brief period. At one stage, a delegation attempted to see the MP, but in the event only privacy was allowed to the front door of his house, whereupon Roland Moyle refused to speak to him. The picket lasted from 2 p.m. until 4 p.m. And amongst those who are listed as taking part are Rick Gibson and yourself. Now, this report obviously doesn't accord with the account that you have just recalled. Can you recall whether or not there was more than one picket outside Roland Moyle's house?
I don't remember them being any more than one, and certainly not. The intention was not to hold a rally; it was a vigil. So I don't recognise this report at all.
And insofar as it says that Roland Moyle was present but refused to speak to a solitary person allowed to the door, that obviously doesn't accord with your recollection now. Can you help us with how strong your recollection now is?
I have very strong recollection of it because it seemed at the time that it was quite a surprise to be invited into the house. And I think there was about half a dozen of us went into the house. And we were all asked who we supported and if we were in Northern Ireland, and we all gave different answers. I remember it very clearly.
Thank you. Could we take that document down, please? Is it right that another activity that South East London Tom was involved in was fly posting?
On one or two occasions, yes.
And that Rick Gibson took part in that?
Yes, I remember that he and a woman called Olivier and myself, we'd agreed to do it on one occasion. And Rick and Olivier came to my flat in the evening to pick me up. And I had one of the migraines, which I occasionally had, and I was in no fit state to do it. So I told them, I'm very sorry, but I'm just not well enough. I was in bed at the time and I went to answer the door and I felt like lying in a darkened room, so I couldn't go with them. But they went off and I was given to understand that they had carried out the fly posting.
And is another activity which Rick Gibson took part in was attending the Greenwich Trades Council with you?
Yes, I think it was something we did once or twice.
And could you assist us with the nature of the Trades Council?
Well, there's a trades council, or was a trades council in most areas, and they were composed of delegates from all the different trade unions in the area. They acted on behalf of the trade unions in the area. I remember the president of Greenwich Trades Council was very sympathetic to us and supported us.
And was the purpose of your meetings to essentially lobby them to advance your cause?
It was, yes, and to see what action they could take on behalf of the cause and to have discussions with them about that.
Thank you. So would now be a convenient moment to take our morning break.
Certainly it would. We have a 15-minute break now. Will you resume your evidence after 15 minutes, please? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is now 11:45 a.m., so we shall reconvene at 12 p.m. Thank you. Afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I'll hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Mr. Buck.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chessum, we were looking at Rick Gibson's activities in the early days of the South East London branch of TOM. I'd like to show you a document about a public meeting. It's tab 23, it's MPS-0728-681. Once it's up, if we could have page 3, please. Dated 5th of June 1975, and paragraph 2 reads, the South East London branch of the Troops Out movement held their first public meeting on Wednesday, the 21st of May 1975 at Charlton House, Charlton Village, SE7. The meeting, which was entitled The Labour Movement and Ireland, attracted an audience of 45 persons and began at 8 p.m, ending at about 9:45. Is it right that this was the first public meeting of the new branch?
It probably would have been if you don't count the public meetings we held in Goldsmiths College. If they're classified as being meetings held by the Socialist Society rather than the local South East London branch, then yes.
Thank you. Paragraph 3. Compared with recent public meetings held by both South and North London branches of TOM, which in terms of numbers were both disasters, this particular meeting was generally regarded as being an unqualified success, mainly because of good local publicity. Much of the credit for this must go to both Richard Chessum and Rick Gibson, who spent a considerable time in publicising the meeting in the local area and large numbers of the Labour movement, albeit members of IS and IMG were present in the audience. Is it right to say that you and Rick Gibson had done a great deal to publicise this meeting?
Yes, we had, and our visits to the Greenwich Trades Council were all part of that.
And we can see just at the very bottom of the page that the meeting was chaired by Rick Gibson. Is that right?
It's not something I remember, but it may well have been.
Thank you. And if we can go over the page now, please, to paragraph 7. Paragraph 7, it says the following persons were identified as having been present. And there are a number of names, including Rick Gibson's and your own, and then a lot that we've had to redact for privacy reasons. One gets the impression reading this document, Mr. Chessum, that Rick Gibson has been very active in seeking to attract people to this meeting. And then when they attend, he reports their attendance to Special Branch. Is that a fair impression, or is there anything you can tell us that would gainsay it?
No, that's fair. I mean, as secretary of the branch, he would obviously would be his job to try and get as many people there as possible. And in wearing his other hat, as an undercover police officer, he would be reporting it to Special Branch.
Thank you. Can we take that down, please? And can we have up instead tab 26, which is MPS-0728-668. And this is a report dated the 23rd of June, 1975. Paragraph 2 reads, members of the South East London branch of the Troops Out movement attended a Labour Party meeting on the evening of Tuesday, the 17th of June, 1975 at Alderwood School, Rainham Close, SE9, which dealt with the forthcoming by-election in West Woolwich. No disorder occurred and members of TOM confined themselves to asking the Labour candidate his views on Ireland and the withdrawal of troops. New and Rick Gibson are both listed as being present. Can you remember this event?
I can't remember it, but it's the kind of thing that we did at the time.
it states that no disorder occurred. Would that be right?
Well, we would have no interest in incurring disorder. Our objective would have been to try and persuade people in the Labour Party to support us.
Yes, well, that takes me to my next question. Was there ever any possibility of public disorder at this event?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Thank you. Could we take that down, please? You described Rick Gibson as being very committed, enthusiastic, and willing in your witness statement. Is that fair?
Yes.
I'd like to explore now your relationship personally with Rick Gibson. You obviously attended meetings together.
Yes.
And you would drink and have a chat.
Yes, usually in the pub after meetings.
You went to see Charlton Athletic play football together.
Yes, I think it was he who suggested that. I think we went on a couple of occasions.
And so how would you describe the level of friendship that you had with Rick Gibson?
Well, I think we developed a kind of a bond because we were both opposed, or we seemed to be opposed, to the sectarianism that was existing within the Troops Out movement. We seemed to share a number of views together. It was relaxing to be able to sit and discuss with somebody who was not involved in one of the other left-wing groups, and to be able to discuss these things freely. I didn't, obviously I had no idea that I was discussing it with an undercover police officer.
Did you regard him as somebody who could be relied upon?
In terms of his efficiency as a branch secretary, yes. And he seemed to be reliably anti-sectarian.
Can you describe his relationship with a senior figure in the movement, Jerry Lawless?
Well, of course, I knew Jerry Lawless from the days of the Anti-Internment League, which is why when we set up the Troops Out movement branch in South East London, I got Jerry to come and speak at the local branch meeting. Rick didn't know him, obviously, until he got involved nationally in the Troops Out movement itself. I suspect he got to know him gradually over a period of time. I knew him before.
And did Rick Gibson align himself with Jerry Lawless within Tom?
Well, yes, he did. I mean, some of the sectarian left groups dismissed us as the Lawless grouping, which was a pejorative term. We regarded ourselves as just independents in the Troops Out movement. But there was an informal alliance at a national level between Jerry Lawless and others and Big Flame, because we jointly had an interest in trying to stop sectarians taking over the organisation. The other thing that united us around Lawless was the fact not only that he was very, very committed on Ireland and had no axe to grind in terms of another left-wing group, but he was a former member of the IMG, and a number of us who were independents in the Troops Out movement were also former members of the IMG. So we had that common historical background.
Can you help us with who you're referring to when you use the phrase the sectarians?
Well, all left-wing organisations, all the Trotskyist organisations tend to be sectarian, some more so than others. But it was in particular the Workers' Fight Group and the Revolutionary Communist Group who we experienced as being the most disruptive.
And when you say disruptive, does that mean trying to essentially take over and exert control over your branch?
Yes, and also causing division in different branches.
In terms of coming back to Rick Gibson and how he behaved, how would you describe his behaviour within the group?
Within the South East London group?
Yes.
Well, he tried to befriend everybody and laid back and relaxed. He gave the impression of somebody who just kept clear of sectarianism and went about being an efficient secretary.
as we've seen from the documents, you were living at the time at 234 Burridge Road. How frequent a visitor was Rick Gibson to your home?
He came quite frequently. Sometimes we had troops out movement meetings there. Those of us who had been members of different far left organisations, Marxist organisations, and who had left them, we felt the need to have further discussion amongst ourselves. And we organised what we called Marxist discussion groups at 234 Burridge Road. And people who came were people who no longer belonged to any of the left groups, but were still Marxists of one kind or another. And Rick attended some of those meetings as well. And I do recall that he came on some social occasions because we got to know him so well.
Was there ever any consideration of him moving in to 234 Burridge Road?
Not until right towards the end of our stay in London. My girlfriend and I, we shared a flat with several other students usually. It wasn't just the two of us. And there was comings and goings. Some students left and then they were replaced by others. And towards the end of our time in London, Rick did say to me, well, if ever there's a vacancy in your flat, he said, I might be interested. That was as far as it went, but of course then we left London.
Thank you. I'd like to move now away from the South East London branch to Rick Gibson's rise through upwards within Tom. First of all, it's right, isn't it, that he played a role in organising Tom's activities to mark the anniversary of Bloody Sunday in 1976.
Yes, there was a Bloody Sunday anniversary march every year.
Can we start, please, by looking at the document at tab 59, which is UCPI 609306. Thank you. This is a report dated the 13th of November 1975. Paragraph 2 reads, the organising committee of the Troops Out movement met at University of London Union, Mallet Street, WC2, between 6:30 and 8 p.m. on Friday, the 7th of November 1975. In addition to 7 members of the committee, both privacy and privacy were present. Paragraph 3, the only item to be discussed was the suggestion by the ad hoc committee for the Bloody Sunday demonstration that a pre-rally mobilisation should be arranged for December. And paragraph 4, the members of the organising committee were bitterly divided on the subject, but the proposal was eventually accepted by 3 votes to 2, 2 persons having abstained. If we scroll down further, Jerry Lawless and Rick Gibson are both present. Can you remember whether you were present at this meeting?
No, I wasn't.
You can't help us, therefore, with the nitty-gritty, but what stands out from this report at paragraph 4 is the fact that there was a division of opinion about an aspect of the organisation for the upcoming commemoration of Bloody Sunday, which was subject to a very narrow vote. Are you able to help us at all with whether Rick Gibson influenced the outcome of that vote?
Well, I wouldn't know that. I know that the IMG were very involved in all of that, and Jerry, as a former member of the IMG, was concerned that they were trying to take over the organisation of Ireland activities, and he saw them as a bit of a rival to his running of the Troops Out movement. So it may all have been related to that.
Thank you. If we could take that down now, please, and go to tab 67, which is MPS-0728-772. We see from paragraph 2 that this is a report about the London Coordinating Committee of the Troops Out movement, which met at the University of London Union, Mallet Street, on the 12th of December 1975 at 7:30 for 2.5 hours. Jerry Lawless chaired the meeting and 17 people are recorded as present. Paragraph 3 reads, the first item of interest was the Bloody Sunday demonstration and rally on the 1st of February 1976. It was established that the only definite speaker was Eamon McCann. Privacy suggested that Tom acquired the services of the Mayday Theatre Group, who performed a play on Northern Ireland, and a group called the Men of No Property, who had released an LP called England's Vietnam. Negotiations were still in progress for the appearance of John Lennon. A rally subcommittee was then set up, consisting of Privacy convener Jerry Lawless, Privacy, and Rick Gibson. You are not named on the list of attendees, so can I take it you can't help us with the detail?
That's right.
But is it right, to your knowledge, that Rick Gibson was a member of the subcommittee for this demonstration?
Yes, he got involved in the national organisation in a way that I didn't at that stage.
And that included, for example, trying to attract high-profile speakers for the event.
Yes.
Could we take that document down, please, and go to tab 69, which is MPS-0728-774. This is a report dated the 20th of January 1976. Paragraph 2 tells us the London Coordinating Committee of the Troops Out movement held its first meeting since Christmas on Friday, the 9th of January 1976 at Friends International Centre, Torrington Place, from 7:45 until 10 p.m. The meeting was chaired by Privacy, was attended by 19 persons. Although a lengthy agenda had been drawn up by the Secretariat, which had met prior to the meeting, the entire proceedings, apart from some minor matters, were devoted to the Tom rally to be held in Hammersmith Palais on Sunday, the 1st of February 1976, following the Bloody Sunday demonstration. And we'll be coming back to the Hammersmith Palais in a moment, but for the meantime, paragraph 4, Jerry Lawless was obliged to report that of all the speakers he had contacted, only 2 were probables, Eamon McCann and Bernadette McCalliskey, and even the latter had not been definitely confirmed. Privacy of the Irish TGWU, Privacy, President of the New York City Council, and John Lennon, the pop star, had all declined. So we get an update there, don't we, on the speakers for that meeting?
Yes, and familiar speakers. I remember Eamon and Bernadette were 2 of the speakers we had at the rally of the Anti-Internment League way back in the early 70s. They were perennials.
And if we go to paragraph 5, there's, in spite of the length of time taken to discuss these items, virtually everything was referred to the rally committee, which, in addition to Jerry Lawless, Rick Gibson, Privacy, was expanded to include Privacy, Privacy's latest girlfriend. So we see that Rick Gibson continued to sit on that committee, which was expanding in size.
Yes.
Paragraph 6, in the short period of time remaining, Privacy criticised Privacy, the Tom press officer, for his inactivity. She proposed he be replaced by a press committee, which she would convene. Rick Gibson and Privacy went further and insisted on Privacy's removal from the Secretariat for persistently being absent from meetings. This subject, however, was referred to the next Secretariat meeting. Can you help us at all with the stance which Rick Gibson took about the then extant press officer and whether he did, as recorded here, actively seek that person's removal from office?
I can't really. I wasn't involved in the national organisation at that time. He was. What surprises me is the extent to which he was really proactive in these reports in trying to make things happen, rather than just being one of a number of people involved.
Thank you. Can we take that down now, please? And can we go to tab 72, which is MPS 0728777. Thank you. If we could pick that up at paragraph 2, it's the report dated the 4th of February 1976. The Secretariat of the Troops Out movement met at the University of London Union, Mallet Street, from 7:30 to 8:30 on Friday, the 16th of January 1976. This particular meeting included the national officers of the Troops Out movement, with the exception of privacy, and was chaired by privacy. We know that Rick Gibson is recorded as attending this meeting as the London organiser, Secretariat. Are we seeing here Rick Gibson beginning to rub shoulders with the most senior people within TOM?
Yes.
And that's nationally?
Yes.
Paragraph 3, if we could have the whole of that paragraph up, please. Thank you. The cancellation of the movement's booking of Hammersmith Palais for its Bloody Sunday rally on the 1st of February was the first item on the agenda. Following a lengthy discussion, it was agreed that legal advice should be sought on the matter. Jerry Lawless proposed that at some time in the future, possibly just prior to February the 1st, it might be necessary to call a press conference to explain the reasons why the use of the hall had been denied. It was the general feeling of the meeting that the police were responsible for this action and for getting the Northwest London branch of Tom banned from the Crown Public House in Cricklewood. The first question I've got for you is about the booking of the Hammersmith Palais. Can you explain to us what happened?
I can't really, because this was all done at national level. And I mean, I was not involved at national level at the time.
Did you become aware that plans for the Bloody Sunday rally were being disrupted by the cancellation of the booking of the Hammersmith Palais?
Yes, yes, we all heard about that. And I must say it reminded me of the time in the Anti-Internment League in the earlier 70s, when in fact we did have information that the special branch had gone round to various public houses and told the publicans there that we were an illegal organisation, and they cancelled our bookings. That happened in the days of the Anti-Internment League. And we were told by the publicans concerned, the special branch had visited them and told them that we were illegal, which of course was not true. So when this happened, when the Hammersmith Palais was, they cancelled the booking for us, then we all suspected that it was a similar kind of situation.
And now that you know that Rick Gibson was in fact an undercover police officer, do you have any concerns about the cancellation of the Hammersmith Palais booking?
Well, yes. He could well have been involved in putting doubts in the mind of the people running the Hammersmith Palais, of course.
Can we take down tab 72, please? And could we have up in its place tab 73, MPS-0728779? Thank you. This is a report dated the 11th of February 1976 from the SDS. It's again a meeting of the London Coordinating Committee of TOM. Could we have paragraph 5, please? And that reads, the question of electing a Tom press officer was again raised, and it was agreed in principle that a press committee should be elected rather than an individual officer. The first function of such a committee would be to prepare a comprehensive statement about the general harassment of Tom by the state, especially the denial of indoor public halls, such as the Hammersmith Palais. Privacy, Rick Gibson, privacy and privacy were then chosen to be members of the committee. Having motivated this strategy, Jerry Lawless refused to serve on the committee. Insofar as you are able to help us, and I do appreciate you are not a party to the particular decisions, it is what's happening that the old press officer is losing office, being replaced by a committee, and an undercover police officer, Rick Gibson, is a part of that committee.
Yes, we heard all about the divisions over the press secondhand, but we were aware that there were problems. The exact nature of the problems was not well known to us at local level.
I see. And now that you do know that Rick Gibson was an undercover police officer, do you have any concerns about the fact that the committee, whose first function was to prepare a comprehensive statement about the general harassment of Tom by the state, included an undercover police officer?
Yes, a short answer.
Would you like to expand on that, please?
Well, given that he was an undercover police officer, he clearly didn't have the welfare of the organization at heart. And his motives were quite different. And we have no means of knowing the extent to which he was sabotaging the organization more generally, and how this was part of that strategy.
Thank you. That can be taken down now. More general questions about the Bloody Sunday march. Would Rick Gibson have had a role in organising things like the stewards, speakers, and the planning generally of that meeting?
He would have been involved in everything.
And privy to all the details?
Yes.
Was there any disorder at the march?
I don't remember any.
We've seen from the earlier documents that you and Rick Gibson were often delegated to attend London events of Tom. Is it right that Rick Gibson was also delegated on occasions to national level events?
Yes.
And was he treated as a trusted comrade?
He wouldn't have been nominated if he wasn't.
I'd now like to focus on some particular posts that he obtained. We've seen some references to the London Coordinating Committee, and he was elected to the London Coordinating Committee, wasn't he?
Yes.
Perhaps we could look at tab 48, MPS-072875. Just to help refresh your memory and locate us in time. This is a report dated the 25th of September 1975. Paragraph 2 says the London Coordinating Committee of the Troops Out movement met at the Friends International Centre, Torrington Place, WC1 on Friday the 19th of September from 9:30 to 10:15. About 32 persons attended. The meeting was chaired by Privacy. The first item discussed was a proposal by both North and North West London branches of Tom that the number of persons on the organising committee be increased by 2. This and a proposal that Privacy and Rick Gibson be elected to the committee was passed. A 3-man standing orders committee for the National Delegate Conference comprising privacy, and probably privacy was approved. There followed ratification of branches in Harrow, Hemel Hempstead and Bootle. So we're seeing that in less than a year after his arrival on the scene, he's voted onto the London Coordinating Committee. Is that right?
Yes.
Could you help us with the significance of the London Coordinating Committee to Tom?
Well, it was the coordinating committee that that really organised all the activities of the branches. It would be responsible for dealing with any problems that arose in the branches and trying to settle them. It was the organising committee that really had oversight of everything that was happening in London.
Did it have any role in setting the campaigning priorities for London branches of Tom?
Yes, it would have done.
And did it take reports from London branches of Tom?
Yes.
And would Rick Gibson on the LCC have had an opportunity to have a say over the affairs of London branches?
Yes.
And over the setting of the strategic priorities for the London branches?
Yes.
It follows from his appointment that may have taken an opportunity from someone else. Do you know whether there was any competition for the posts on the London Coordinating Committee?
Which particular post are you talking about?
The one that we're at the moment. I'm asking about this one, about the appointment we've just seen. Do you know whether that was something that anybody else, any genuine campaigner, would have liked to have occupied?
Well, I know that there was a time when they wanted a London organiser, and I was approached by both Jerry Lawless and by a senior member of Big Flame to ask me if I would be interested, and I was given to understand from both of them that if I was interested, they would support me in that role. What followed after that was a vote in the local South East London branch to elect 2 delegates to the London Coordinating Committee. Rick was involved. Rick was elected and I wasn't, and he got 2 more votes than me in the South East London branch meeting. And I think this took the national people a bit by surprise that I wasn't elected by my local branch onto the London Coordinating Committee.
Just to be clear, are we talking about, does this relate to the appointment which is recorded in the document on the screen or not?
This was September 75. This was talking about 2 extra people being elected to a committee, wasn't it? I was asked if I wanted to be the London organiser, and in fact, Rick himself became the London organiser.
Thank you. We'll come back to the London.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to be clear. Thank you. Whilst we're with the LCC, could we take that document down, please, and bring up tab 82, UCPI 609684, please. Again, I do appreciate that you weren't on at these committees, and there may be a limit to how far you can help us, but just in case. This is a report dated the 12th of May, 1976. It's a meeting of the London Coordinating Committee on the 23rd of April, 1976 at the University of London Union. And I'm going to alight upon a number of paragraphs which refer to Rick Gibson. First of all, paragraph 3, and I'm afraid it's a very poor quality document, but we'll do our best. Following the acceptance of the previous meeting's minutes, Rick Gibson, convener of the Secretariat, reported on the arrangements to date for the TOM National Delegate Conference. He said that the conference would be held from 11 a.m. on Saturday the 15th to 4 p.m. on Sunday the 16th of May 1976 at the City of London Polytechnic, Whitechapel Road E1, and that subject to the ratification of that meeting, the Secretariat recommended that there be a 3-person standing orders committee comprising privacy and privacy. This was accepted, providing that privacy, who was not present, agreed. Then if we can go down to paragraph 5, please. Next came reports from Privacy and Rick Gibson on a fringe meeting set up by the Troops Out movement at the Labour Party Young Socialists Conference in Blackpool. Privacy said that the meeting had been organised by the Socialist Charter and that in spite of gross sectarianism from Privacy towards both Privacy and TOM policies, the meeting had been successful. Gibson severely criticised Privacy for his behaviour and said that TOM members should not attack each other at open meetings. Over the page. Thank you. It was then decided that Gibson, Privacy and Privacy should prepare a document on the Blackpool meeting for circulation to TOM branches and inclusion in the left-wing press. The final item was a short report on the TOM Press Committee from Rick Gibson, but nothing of note was said. Now, it would appear from this report, put bluntly, that Rick Gibson is in the thick of it. From talking to him, did you get the impression that he was a very active member of the London Coordinating Committee?
Well, very much so, because he moved from the London Coordinating Committee and being London organisers to become convener of the National Secretariat. And he was obviously moving up and up in the organisation. And he would have been trusted by Lawless and people in the leadership. And for that reason, he would have been given a lot of responsibility.
And the reference we see to him severely criticising somebody for their behaviour and attacking another member of TOM in public, was the taking of a position and the criticism of others something that you ever experienced Rick Gibson doing?
Well, I understand that one of the people he attacked was someone called Sean McGamner, who was in fact the founder and leader of Workers' Fight and a bitter enemy of Jerry Lawless. So in attacking him, he would have curried favour with Lawless and he would have established his credentials even more with Lawless. So there may have been a reason for this kind of attack on particular individuals.
Thank you. Can we take that document down, please? And can we turn now to the question of the post of London organiser? I'd like to start with tab 55, which is MPS-0728-736. This is a meeting of the organising committee of TOM, which took place on the 20th of October and is reported on the 28th of October. At paragraph 4, it reads, Jerry Lawless then proposed that nominations for the vacant national officer posts not filled at the recent National Delegate Conference should be delayed for 2 weeks to allow branches time to discuss the matter. The only exception to this was the position of London organiser, and it was agreed that Rick Gibson should stand for this post. Is this the post that you were talking about a little while ago?
Yes. I had already told people that I wished to withdraw. And the reason I wished to withdraw was a personal reason, really, because a friend of mine was also wanting to stand for it. And Jerry Lawless approached me and said some very derogatory things about her and said that he would support me against her. And I was very friendly with her and her partner at the time. And I began to feel that I was a bit compromised and that this would compromise my friendship with that couple. So I began to feel that I was best withdrawing, really. And I think she withdrew too. After this had happened, I explained this to the member of Big Flame who had approached me about doing the job and said that I was worried about this. And then sometime after that, he approached me again. He said, well, don't worry about it because Rick Gibson has agreed to do it.
Thank you. Could we take that document down now, and could we have up in its place, please, MPS-0728-762? And if we, thank you, if we look at paragraph 2, we'll see that this is a report about a meeting on the 7th of November 1975 at the University of London Union of the All London Troops Out movement. And it was to discuss the setting up of a secretariat to replace the TOM organising committee. A resolution to that effect had been passed at the recent TOM National Delegate Conference. Could you help us with this reorganisation, please?
Again, I was not involved in it at national level, simply because I had not been elected to the London Coordinating Committee and didn't get involved anymore at national level. So I heard about all these things at second hand. I wasn't clear the exact reasons for this reorganisation.
But was it a significant reorganisation of TOM?
I would assume that it was a reorganisation to make it more effective.
And if we can go down now, please, to paragraph 5. Next came recommendations for the remaining national officers. Privacy was proposed as literature officer and privacy as parliamentary organiser. There were 2 nominations for Labour Party organiser, privacy and privacy. And after lengthy discussion, Rick Gibson was selected to stand for the post of London organiser. Mm. It's right, isn't it, that he went on to be the London organiser?
Yes, yes.
Could you help us with what information that post would have given him access to?
Well, I think we answered it really on my answer to a previous question. He would have known everything what was happening in every London branch. He would have had an overview of all of that. Information about divisions within different branches would have come to him. He would have been partly responsible for trying to sort them all out. And he would also have been involved in the strategy for London.
And would he have had access and the ear of national organisers?
Yes.
And would he have had access to any legal advice that was being taken at a London level?
He would have done if any legal advice was being taken.
And we saw earlier the reference to a desire to take legal advice about the cancellation of the Hammersmith Palais. Is that the sort of thing that he might have been privy to?
Yes.
He went on to national level, and in particular to become the convener of the national officers of the Secretariat, didn't he?
Yes.
Are you able to assist us with what additional information that post would have given him?
Well, he had previously had oversight of the whole London organisation. That would have given him oversight of the national organisation. And he would have been in charge of the names and addresses of people all over the country who have access to that database.
And would he have been privy essentially to the national strategic level thinking of
Oh, yes, yes, yes. He would be one of the key people involved in that.
And would he have had any influence, if he'd chosen to use it, to steer the direction of the organisation nationally?
Yes.
Can I ask you generally about Tom, please? Did Tom, at the demonstrations it organised, seek to encourage any public disorder?
Never to my knowledge.
Other than fly posting, was it involved as an organisation in promoting any unlawful conduct?
No.
Was Tom seeking to overthrow parliamentary democracy?
No. we were lobbying MPs to try and get them on our side. We supported parliamentary democracy.
Thank you. There is a reference to a speaker at an event saying that he had met several prominent members of the Provisional IRA. I'll just call that up so that you can see it. It's at tab 49. It's UCPI 607665. And this is a report dated the 29th of September 1975. Paragraph 2 says the South East London branch of the Troops Out movement held their regular weekly meeting at Charlton House, Charlton SE7 on Tuesday, the 23rd of September 1975, from 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. 15 persons attended the meeting, which was chaired by Rick Gibson. Privacy opened by giving a brief educational talk on Northern Ireland. He stated that on a recent visit to Belfast, he had met several prominent members of the Provisional IRA and members of the Irish Republican Socialist Party. Nothing else of particular interest was mentioned. And if we scroll down, please, we can see that you and Rick Gibson are both recorded as being present at that meeting. Could you help us, please, with what relationship there was, formal or informal, between the Provisional IRA and Tom?
There was no direct relationship between Tom and the Provisional IRA. I suspect that that report is a little bit inaccurate, in that it wouldn't be the Provisional IRA, it would be Provisional Sinn Féin, the political party that they would have met. The IRA were a secret organisation, and its members were not commonly available to members of the public. So I don't think he could have met members of the Provisional IRA. I think maybe there was a confusion there between the IRA and Sinn Féin.
Were there individuals within Tom who were sympathetic to the Provisional IRA?
It's very difficult. I mean, Tom had members all over the country. It would be difficult to say absolutely that there was not a single member with that kind of sympathy. But in general, we were not an organisation that supported violence. We supported changing British policy in order to end the violence.
So the house line was the two aims that we discussed at the start of your evidence.
Yes.
Can I move now, please, to Big Flame? You describe Big Flame as an organisation in the libertarian Marxist tradition. Is that right?
Right.
So not authoritarian.
They were very much the opposite of authoritarian. They were very egalitarian and libertarian, and encouraging free discussion and open discussion, tolerance of opposing views. In many ways, they were a safe haven from much of the sectarian activity that was going on inside the Tom at the time.
they would stand in contrast to some of the more disciplined authoritarian left-wing organisations.
They were, and they had lots of feminist women in Big Flame who felt uncomfortable in a sectarian atmosphere, and they found Big Flame much more conducive to them.
And you explain in your witness statement that Rick Gibson took an interest in Big Flame. Could you explain that, please?
Well, after I'd been in the IMG and left it and reacted against some of the authoritarianism of the Trotskyist groups, I was still a Marxist of a kind, and I wanted to involve myself with others who were of like mind. And one of the senior people in Big Flame did approach me and say they were having discussion groups, and they were inviting people to attend who weren't actually members of their organization because they wished them to be open discussion groups. It was by invitation only for people they felt would be sympathetic and interested in being involved. I got involved, and then Rick Gibson actually found out that I was involved, and he said, do you think they'd let me come along? And I said, well, I'll tell them you're interested. And I told them that Rick was interested in coming along to some of the discussion groups, and they said, fine, bring him along.
And you tell us in your witness statement that you did bring him along. He attended meetings, but he didn't, as far as you are aware, ever become a member.
My understanding is that he was not a member. They took it in turns to being an egalitarian organization. There was rotation of speakers at these meetings. There was discussions, and everyone took a turn at leading a discussion. And there was one occasion when Rick took a turn. And I always remember it because he had voluminous notes in front of him, sheets of paper with notes on, but he seemed unable to make use of them. And when he tried to give the opening introduction, he completely dried up, and there was a really rather embarrassed silence. And one of the women there said, well, Rick's given us okay an introduction, let's open it to general discussion. So I felt that he wasn't really up to doing it. He didn't really understand what he was trying to talk about. He'd made notes, but was unable to make use of them. So perhaps that should have been an early indication that he wasn't really a committed person.
Was it your impression that Rick Gibson wanted to become a member of Big Flame?
I understood. I didn't understand until I had left London, actually, and I went back on one occasion to meet people I used to know, and that was when I went back and discovered that he had disappeared and that they'd uncovered who he truly was. And they told me that the reason was that he tried to join Big Flame. And at that point, they had various suspicions about him, worries about him, and they did an investigation into him and discovered who he was.
Thank you. I'll come back to that in a little while. Just like to call up two reports which record some information about Big Flame meetings at which Rick Gibson appears to have been present. First of all, UCPI 5010775. Thank you. This is a report on Big Flame dated the 5th of August, 1976, which I'd like to pick up at paragraph 2. It says, as a general policy of attempting to offer some form of resistance to the leadership, i.e. lawless clique within the Troops Out movement, Big Flame have decided to revamp their London Island Commission, which was suspended some months ago. It was felt that the previous series of meetings had got somewhat out of hand and were at the end in no way controlled by Big Flame. On this occasion, however, it was decided that these present meetings would be called and controlled by Big Flame, and that independent elements invited should be under no illusion about that fact. Paragraph 3. Such a meeting was held on Sunday, the 25th of July, 1976, at 62 Peckham Road, SE5, the home of Rick Gibson. 8 persons, 5 of whom were members of Big Flame, attended the meeting, which was chaired by Privacy. The proceedings lasted from 6 p.m. to 9:45 p.m. And if we could go down to paragraphs 5 and 6, please. At 5, this immediately led on to the position of Trotskyists in Troops Out movement and general criticism of their tactics. Privacy intimated that an anti-Trotskyist grouping within the Troops Out movement, which would encompass most independent elements, could defeat the present leadership. But I'm struggling to read that. It's something the opposition to this suggestion of possibly forming a breakaway Tom, his ideas became somewhat watered down. Those present, however, were very critical of the leadership, especially since independents tended to work hard at projects which they did not fully agree with. On the other hand, although work around such issues and the Prevention of Terrorism Act and anti-recruiting was part of Tom policy, the Trotskyists had refused to assist. If we go down to paragraph 6, please. And you can see that Rick Gibson was listed at paragraph 6 as amongst those present. I'd like you to hold the contents that I've just read in mind, please, Mr. Chessum. And can we take that down and bring up 21, UCPI 50s 21388. And we can see there a report of the 27th of September 1976, and it says at paragraph 2, independent elements within the Troops Out movement have over recent months become increasingly frustrated at carrying out the doctrine of the lawless clique to the exclusion of all else. As a result, Big Flame members in TGM have been instrumental in bringing together some of the more influential members of the organization in the hope of formulating a common policy with which to fight the leadership at the next National Delegate Conference due to take place in late November. If you could scroll down, please. A gathering of these was held on Thursday, the 2nd of September 1976 at Privacy, the home of Privacy, and it gives the times. Although only 9 persons attended, it was seen as a significant beginning, since during the course of the meeting it became increasingly clear that the major aim of those represented would have to be the defeat of the present leadership and the replacement of them by independent members. Privacy saw the likely makeup of the new leadership as being an amalgam of Rick Gibson, Privacy, and hopefully Privacy, and if he would agree to rejoin the organization. Those present thought that without this change, the Troops Out movement would cease to exist. We can see further down the page that Rick Gibson is recorded as having been present. Now, would it be right to say that you had no idea of these meetings at the time?
I had no idea that these meetings were taking place. In July, I got married and we went off to Cornwall for a couple of weeks on a honeymoon. We were due to leave London at the beginning of September for me to go and take up a grant to do a PhD at Warwick University. And in the meantime, in August, we made several trips to the Midlands to try and organise accommodation for when we got there. So I think from early part of July, I was not involved and didn't know what was going on.
Now that you have seen these 2 documents, which appear to show, I'll put it bluntly, plotting, Can you help us, as someone who was an experienced member of Tom, with your analysis of what was happening and Rick Gibson's role in it?
Well, there'd always been a rather uneasy alliance between Jerry Lawless and the grouping that supported him and Big Flame, because they were rather different politically. Lawless and his friends were hardline Trotskyists in many ways, and Big Flame was much more libertarian. They had different priorities for work in the organization, but they had a joint interest in stopping smaller sectarian left groups from taking over the organization. For a long time, it was only that alliance between the Lawless people and Big Flame that kept these sectarian organizations at bay. The fact that at this stage, Big Flame were involved in trying to take over the leadership from Lawless would suggest to me that there were less people involved at the national leadership level. And I do wonder if some of the left Trotskyist groups that have been involved in the organization had decided to call it a day and left, because I find it strange that Big Flame should think at that stage that they had the numbers to take over the organization. Rick Gibson had always been supportive of both Jerry Lawless and Big Flame, and obviously his strategy was to maintain himself as a bridge between the two groups. At this stage, he'd obviously decided to plot with Big Flame against Lawless, which was a change in strategy. I suspect that he saw the way the wind was blowing, and that he felt the strategy needed to change so that he could keep in the center of things. And he was also, it became clear that he was very interested in joining Big Flame, and he would want to be on their side in order that he could, as we now know, as an undercover police officer, get involved in infiltrating them. I know that he had told people in Big Flame that he was interested in joining, and that he told them that he was thinking of moving to Liverpool. And it was in Liverpool that Big Flame had a sizable branch that had close contacts with people in nationalist communities in the north of Ireland. And this was one of the things I think that aroused their suspicions.
Thank you. Sir, can we take that document down, please? Thank you. Sir, I'm afraid I've rather overrun. Might I suggest, I think I may need as much as another half an hour. So I'm in your hands as to whether we should break for lunch now or whether I should carry on.
Do you think you can finish in half an hour? Because we can then both break for lunch and break to permit people to put additional questions to you if they have any, and to permit Mr. Marquis to consider whether he wishes to re-examine.
Yes, I can do that, sir.
That depends in part upon the shorthand writers. May I ask if they're willing to continue for another half an hour or so without a break? And also, of course, in part on Mr. Chessum. Are you willing to put off your lunch break by half an hour, Mr. Chessum?
Yes, that'll be fine.
Thank you very much. And then, subject to the shorthand writers, we'll continue to finish your questions.
Thank you. I've been told the shorthand writers are content to continue, and I'm grateful to them. So some final questions, Mr. Chessum, about Big Flame as an organisation. To your knowledge, was Big Flame involved in the commission of criminal offences?
No, they weren't.
Was Big Flame involved in promoting public disorder at demonstrations?
I never knew them to be.
Did Big Flame have as an objective overthrowing parliamentary democracy?
They wanted to establish a socialist society as opposed to a capitalist society and economy. that I think does not necessarily mean that they want to overthrow democracy, parliamentary democracy.
Thank you. Can I move now to a completely different topic, and that is the sexual relationships which Rick Gibson became involved in as an undercover police officer. The inquiry has been greatly assisted by a witness statement from the woman who we are calling Mary. And so I needn't ask you a great deal of detail about this, but what I would like to ask you is, did you know about the sexual relationship at the time?
I knew about the relationship that Rick Gibson had established between Mary and her flatmate. That was common knowledge in the South East London branch. I also knew that he was involving himself in a relationship with someone in Big Flame. I got the feeling that these relationships were not substantial, but they were sexual relationships. I didn't find out until later that he'd had a much more substantial relationship with another woman in Big Flame.
Sticking with Mary for the moment, did the fact that it was known that he was having a sexual relationship with Mary have any influence on whether or not you suspected Rick Gibson of being an undercover police officer?
No, because this kind of sleeping around was very common in that time amidst the kind of people that I knew. It came as a great culture shock to me when I moved to London, because I was a Methodist from a village, and we had a very different culture. But certainly when I moved to London, I discovered that many of the people I knew had a completely different culture, and their lifestyle was very different. So the fact that Rick Gibson, along with many others, was involving himself in this lifestyle would not have aroused suspicions about him any more than all the other people.
Well, perhaps the other way around, would it have allayed any suspicions you might have had, in the sense of, would you have expected a police officer to do that?
I wouldn't have expected a police officer to do that, no. Although, of course, we now know that many of them did.
And I'm sensing that you didn't have any real suspicions about Rick Gibson anyway. Is that fair?
It is, except to one proviso, that when he first appeared on the scene, my then girlfriend and I, we did discuss him, and we discussed the fact that why is he so interested in Ireland? Because most of the people we knew who were interested in Ireland they either had Irish connections, in the sense that they had Irish family connections, or they had been involved in other left-wing campaigns and then began to rethink their attitude to Ireland as well. Rick didn't fall into either of these two categories, so it puzzled us as to why he was so interested. And we even discussed the possibility that, could he be an infiltrator of some kind? But as time went by and we got to know him, we became friendly with him, a year or two later, we looked back and said, oh, weren't we paranoid? We thought Rick might be an undercover officer of some kind when we first met him. It's embarrassing. We were so paranoid at the time. And of course, we were right the first time.
Now, you tell us in your statement that there was another female Tom activist with whom Rick Gibson had some sexual contact, obviously without revealing her identity in any way. Can you help us with whether you knew that at the time?
There was one woman in Big Flame that I think it was common knowledge, just as it was common knowledge that Mary and her flatmate had a sexual relationship with Rick Gibson. So it's fairly common knowledge that this other woman in Big Flame had that kind of relationship.
And then the fourth relationship, though, was unknown to you at the time.
That was unknown to me until Rick was uncovered as being an undercover police officer, and I was shown the file on him that Big Flame had. where he had left a note to that other woman explaining why he was leaving.
And you tell us that you were given to understand that that was a more serious relationship. Can you, again, without revealing the identity of the woman in any way, help us with any details?
I wasn't told the identity of that woman, and in fact, I still don't have definite information about it, although I now have suspicions about it. The reason why I was given to understand that it was a very substantial relationship was that when Rick Gibson was uncovered and departed from the scene, he felt obliged to leave a note to that woman explaining why he'd gone away. He didn't feel obliged to leave that note to anybody else. He left it to her alone. So it was clearly a close relationship and it had been long-standing.
Thank you. Can I move now to the officer we know as HN353, who used a cover name Gary Roberts, on the information that we were able to provide you when we requested a witness statement. It didn't ring any bells. Now that you've had access to the hearing bundle, is it still the case that it doesn't ring any bells?
It rings a few bells now because I've learned that he became vice president of the Students' Union at Thames Poly. And we did have someone on the executive of Thames Poly who was very sympathetic to us, and it was very helpful to us when we were organising local things. So I now realise that that person was Gary Roberts.
Are you able to help us then at all with what he did?
No, I can't remember much about it. I know that when we organised anything, we wanted to get the support of local students as well as the local labour movement. And we contacted Thames Poly because we knew that particular students' union was sympathetic and helpful. And we knew that there was one person there who belonged to a left group and was particularly sympathetic.
And that was Gary Roberts?
I now realise that it was, yes.
Thank you. Can we come now to Big Flame discovering that Rick Gibson was not who he said he was? And you've touched upon this already. You've explained that you only found out later when you returned to London to visit old friends. Can you help us with how it was that Big Flame established that Rick Gibson was not who he said he was?
Yes, I returned to London I wanted to see lots of old friends. It was the first time I'd been back to London since moving to the Midlands. And one of the first things I did was to go to the West Midlands meeting of the Troops Out movement, the West London meeting of the Troops Out movement, which happened to be meeting that day. So I went straight to that meeting before I went to the accommodation I'd established in London. And when I attended that meeting, I was immediately approached by the most senior member of Big Flame, who said, "I want to talk to you about your friend Rick Gibson." He said, "I've got my clothes in a laundrette down the road. If you'll wait until after the meeting's finished, come with me to the laundrette and I'll tell you all about it." And he then told me all about the way in which they had uncovered Rick Gibson. He said that they had become suspicious of him and decided to investigate him, that they had somehow or other got hold of his birth certificate. They somehow got hold of his date of birth from a document of some kind. And they went to Somerset House to look up his birth certificate, which they found there. But they weren't content with that. It told them where he was born, and they went down to the local records office where he was born, somewhere in Kent, I think it was. And there it was, they discovered his death certificate. So they were quite thorough in their investigation. When they discovered that he was not who he said he was, they were unsure who he was. They didn't know whether he was Special Branch, MI5. He claimed to have worked before he came to London at a campsite in Essex somewhere. And they went to visit that campsite and discovered it was run by an army major and his son, So they wondered if he was army intelligence. They even wondered whether he was from a fascist organization. So even though they knew he wasn't who he said he was, they were unclear as to precisely who he was, though they thought that the most probable thing was that he was the state in some form. When they discovered that he was not who he said he was, they were rather scared about this. They wanted to, as it were, persuade him to go away. So they told him that they checked everybody who joined Big Flame or tried to join Big Flame, and this was a routine thing, but would he tell them things about what school he went to, if he had relatives anywhere that they could check up on, all these kind of things. They actually checked the school that he said he'd been to, and they said nobody of that name has ever been here. And they confronted him with that. And he told them, every time they confronted him with something, he made up another story. He said, oh, well, he said, it was embarrassing. I got expelled from the school I went to, so I lied about which one I'd gone to. I didn't want you to know about that. And he gave them the names of people who he claimed were his relatives, and they checked those out, and they were the same surname, but they didn't know anybody called Rick. They told me that a couple of the people they checked out, he had given their addresses, and they were people who lived at ports. And this aroused their suspicion that he might be Special Branch, because they felt that one of the jobs of Special Branch was to check the ports. And this would give him an alibi for being there if he was seen there. So they became more and more convinced that he was Special Branch of some kind. But they didn't want to reveal to him that they really knew who he was. They wanted him to still think that they were just checking up on him in the hope that that would make him go away. They'd take fright and go away. And it was only when he didn't go away, he bluffed it out the whole time, that they decided after a meeting to take him into a pub. And when they waited, I was told, they waited for him to buy his round of drinks. And when he came back, they spread out his birth certificate and his death certificate on the table in front of him. And they said he went as white as a sheet. He went very emotional. He looks as though he's going to start and cry. He still said it was a mistake in the records office. He said, I can give you the number of a local company. I can give you their extension number. If you ring that number, I have a brother who works there. You ring that number in the morning and he'll confirm who I am. So they did that. And again, the same thing happened. Sure enough, there was somebody there on that extension who had the name Gibson, but he said, I haven't got a brother. So they then went to his flat, which I now know they had had a meeting in, and they found it completely empty. There was not a stick of furniture left in it. And it had obviously been cleared out overnight, and they never saw him again. But as I say, he had left this note to the woman with whom he'd had a substantial relationship with, and she handed it to Big Flame, and they put it on the file. I was told who had the file. I went to his house and he showed me the file. Inside the file, I saw his birth certificate and his death certificate, and I also saw the note that he had left to this woman. There was no name of the woman on the note. I can't remember whether there was none there or whether it had been redacted. So, I mean, I became very convinced that, in fact, yes, he was the state infiltrating Big Flame. They were so concerned that they actually compiled a little dossier which they put in a sealed envelope. And the sealed envelope was given to, I was told, 2 different people. And they were told that only open it if something happens to a member of Big Flame. Otherwise, it's all secret. So far from seeking retribution against Rick while he was around, they were worried about retribution from the state because they'd uncovered him. And they were quite scared. They told me not to tell anyone about it all, to keep it secret. So for a long time, I didn't tell anyone. Eventually, of course, it's such an important thing to have happened that I did start to tell people. And in the end, journalists came to see me in the 80s. They came to see me to talk about Rick Gibson. And I was interviewed by, I think, 3 different journalists who came to see me at different times. And I now know that the state were aware of the fact that these journalists were visiting me.
Thank you. Can you help us with whether any of the suspicions about Rick Gibson arose from what he had been saying to the women with whom he'd been having sexual relations?
They never said that it was the women who had suspected him, although when I knew that he had been uncovered as an infiltrator from the state, one of the first things I did was to go to the flat of Mary, and she was still sharing it with that same flatmate. And I went to the flat and I said to them, I want to talk to you about Rick Gibson. And they knew that he'd disappeared from the scene. And I said, well, why do you think he disappeared? And Mary's flatmate actually spontaneously said, we wondered if he was a police officer. And I said, why was that? And she said, well, we've got no real evidence, but after he'd had relationships with us of a sexual nature, he never stayed until the morning. He was left in the middle of the night. We wondered if he was going back to a wife and family. And I said, well, I can tell you that I do have evidence now that he was an infiltrator, and I told them the whole story about Big Flame.
And what was their reaction to that?
I think they were shocked, but there's part of them that was not surprised.
And you took some steps of your own, you tell us in your witness statement. You visited the premises of the employer that Rick Gibson had said he'd worked for.
Well, yeah, this is another thing that, looking back, alarms me. It makes me realize just how much he was targeting me. Because before he became London organizer, he had reported to his superiors that I was interested in the job of London organizer. And it was after that that he managed to get on the London Coordinating Committee and I didn't. And I wondered if, people were in on it, whether to stop me getting there. And then when he reported, I now know, to his superiors that I'd got a job with the London Electricity Board in Woolwich. And it was shortly after this that he told me that he had now got a job in Woolwich. And there was this office round the back of a bank, up a staircase. And I now think, well, it seems fairly clear to me now that that office was a front. And he was obviously still wanting to keep in close contact with me. I relate those two things now. So I only went to that office once, and there was a woman there, and there was quite a few files, but I didn't go right inside the office. I went just inside it and could see the rest of the inside of it. Rick had suggested to me that since he was working in Woolwich, we could meet every lunchtime and maybe meet in a pub and have a chat. And there were 2 occasions when I think I suggested it. There was a Woolwich free ferry that went across the river and back again, and there would be just time to go on that. And it was a nicer way on the Woolwich free ferry. It was like a free boat trip. We could meet on that instead of going into a smoky pub room, and we did that a couple of times. So when I learned that Rick had disappeared, I thought, well, I'll go and investigate that office. And I went to it, and it was closed. And I went into the bank at the front of the building, and I asked information. I said, well, that office round the back of up the stairs, are there still people there? And they said, oh no, they moved a month ago. It was just as Rick's flat was empty of all sticks of furniture, so the office had been vacated. So I thought, this was obviously just a front. It wasn't a genuine office. Rick claimed at the time, he said he was driving a van. When I only went to that office once, and that was at his suggestion. It was by appointment with him. And he said he had got a job driving a van, and because of that, he was going to places like Hull, again, a port. Obviously now I know that he was an undercover police officer, he wouldn't have another full-time job. The bank actually gave me the telephone number of the people who had moved from that office up their stairs. And I rang that number. And when I rang it, to begin with, they said, "Oh, hold the line." And they went off for some considerable time. And when they came back, they said, "Well, he doesn't work here anymore, but we are still in contact with him. If you would like to leave your name, address, and telephone number, we'll ask him to get back to you." Well, of course, obviously, he never did.
Thank you. I just want to go back to something you said a little earlier about speaking to journalists in the 1980s. Could we have up, please, tab 97, which is MPS-0731-078. This is a special branch memorandum from a detective sergeant to the chief superintendent of S Squad, of which the SGS was a part. It's dated the 24th of June, 1986. So the following information has been received from a secret and delicate source. Privacy, a freelance researcher, is currently engaged in obtaining material on special branch activity on behalf of Privacy of the Observer. This research is expected to take at least 4 to 5 weeks, and Privacy is uncertain whether, because of the amount of the information he is obtaining, the final product will be published in the Observer or will appear as a book. In particular, Privacy has received information from Richard Chessum, who works as a press officer for the Labour Committee on Ireland, concerning a man named Gibson, who is known also to Privacy. It appears Gibson was discovered to be a special branch infiltrator into Big Flame in the mid-1970s. Privacy has apparently told Privacy that Privacy, another member of the LCI and of the Troops Out movement, had seen Gibson outside New Scotland Yard. Privacy has given Privacy's telephone number and has also suggested he contact Privacy, who was a member of Big Flame at the time. So you mentioned earlier that you now know that the police were onto the communications between you and the journalist, and this is evidence of that. But it's also evidence, isn't it, of a missing piece of the jigsaw, namely that Rick Gibson had been spotted outside New Scotland Yard.
Yes, I know the identity of the person who thought he'd seen him outside Scotland Yard. This was a long time after he disappeared. So yes, nobody had ever seen him since, but this particular person reported the fact that he'd seen a man he was sure was Rick Gibson entering New Scotland Yard.
And as far as you're aware, is that how the connection with the police, as opposed to a fascist organisation or the security service, was made?
Sorry, I didn't repeat that.
Is that how a connection between Rick Gibson and the police was made, as opposed to the other suspicions you had, namely that he might have come from a fascist organisation or from the security service?
Well, it was confirmation to us, really, that he was a police officer rather than anything else. I had a friend who had written a book on the media and Ireland. And she often contacted me and said, "I've got a journalist who's contacted me, and I'd like to put him in touch with you because he's interested in Rick Gibson and his disappearance. Is it all right if I give this journalist your name and number?" Because it was filtered by her and I trusted her, I said yes to several of them. And they came to visit me in Sheffield, actually.
You tell us that you got married in the summer of 1976. Did Rick Gibson attend your wedding?
Oh, no. No, we didn't do that. It was, we didn't want a big wedding. It was a very small private family affair. So, you know, we didn't invite anybody outside of immediate family to it.
In the bundle that we've provided you with, there are a number of reports about you and your partner. As you've mentioned, there's a report about your employment. In fact, there's more than one report about your employment. There's a report about your wedding. There's a report about you moving to Kenilworth. And then there's a later report about you moving to Leamington Spa in 1977. I think on the basis of what you've told us, by that stage, you were a member of the Labour Party.
Yes.
You've seen all of those reports. What is your reaction to Special Branch having been recording such extensive details of your personal life?
It's very surprising to me that they were interested in those personal details. I can understand them being interested in the political aspect of our lives, but to be interested in those personal details to the extent of reporting on them, very often very trivial things, I do find that rather worrying. I find it sinister, actually.
And my final question to you is, you've expressed in your witness statement a concern that there might be a link between the reporting on you and the difficulties you experienced later in life obtaining employment. Could you explain the basis of those fears to us?
Yes, well, I applied for thousands of jobs. I calculated at the time about 1,500 jobs over a period of 5 years in the 80s, applying for absolutely everything. Jobs for which I was qualified, jobs for which I was well overqualified, in a desperate attempt to get work. And I just never seemed to be able to get an interview for anything. There were other factors at work, and I understand that. But I think the sheer longevity of my unemployment and the fact that it went on for so very long does give rise to suspicion in my mind. And there was the occasion so much later in my life when I came back from Edinburgh to Sheffield to live here again, when I was desperate for any kind of job just to keep in touch with my children. And I applied for a job just as a sorter with the post office. And we had this little test we had to do. And I more than excelled in the test they gave us. We were told that there would be feedback to tell us why they weren't employing us. So I called to ask for that feedback. And I was told that in my case, they couldn't give me any. And I said, why not? And the man said, well, I'm not at liberty to tell you. Now, there had been one or two letter bombs sent by Republicans in the period just before then. And I did strongly suspect at the time that they had access to the fact that I'd been politically active on the question of Northern Ireland, and that this might well be a factor. This might well be the reason why they couldn't tell me, why they couldn't give me feedback. Obviously, I had no direct evidence, all the other jobs that I applied for, but I know many of my friends were very surprised that I didn't get interviewed for some of those jobs. And I was putting it down to other factors, but in the end, I began to think, well, is there something else going on here?
Thank you. Mr. Chessum, you've been very patient with my many questions. Thank you very much. If you could just stay there for a moment, please.
Mr. Chessum, our procedures require that there is now a break anyway, apart from needing to have time to have some lunch, so that those who may have questions that they want to ask of you through Mr. Barr can put them to him. Would you mind coming back after a lunch break of an hour and answering any questions there may be?
That will be fine if you need me.
Well, Would you be back in an hour, please? I ask, in other words, available on screen in an hour.
Yes.
In that eventuality.
Yes.
Thank you. Then we'll break now for an hour and for everybody to have lunch and for those questions to be contemplated.
We will now take a break for lunch. For those in the virtual hearing room, please remember to join your breakout rooms. The time is now 1:35 p.m, so we shall resume at 2:35 p.m. Thank you.